everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. Thank you for joining me today. Today we're going to be talking about employee self-service options, including workflow and approval in the iSolved system. So we have quite a few clients joining today. Some have already converted to the iSolved system from our legacy payroll platform, but some are still on CyberPay. So please note that this webinar does cover iSolved functionality only. And if you are not on iSolved and would like to convert, you can reach out to your client service representative. My name is Lena, and I will be going over the topics that we're going to learn today. All of you have been placed in listen-only mode, so I won't be able to hear you if you speak. Questions are welcome throughout the webinar, and I'll try to get to as many as possible at the end of the webinar. Our agenda today is going to be to learn what options are available in employee self-service, and also how to set up workflow and approval processes for those options. So I'll follow this up with a question and answer session at the end. So let's get started. The first thing that I want to briefly talk about, because it pertains to workflow approvals, is we're going to talk about our user type hierarchy in iSolved. So let's go into self-service roles. All right, our user type hierarchy is we have in iSolved 4 different types of users. We have employees, which are employees have the right to see whatever we give them access to in employee self-service. We have supervisors, managers, and client users. So besides the client user, supervisors and managers both have rights to see employees' options besides the employee. So where we can determine what rights that they have to employee options is on this self-service roles page. So if a person has been given a role as a manager or supervisor, and we're going to walk through together how to actually set up that role and assign it to an employee today. If they've been given that role as a manager or supervisor, they can see information about employees that report to them, and they can be given rights to approve or reject changes that the employee has made through the employee self-service portal. Some companies only have managers in their setup. For example, one manager is in charge of a group of employees. That would be a simple setup. But other companies have a manager that's in charge of a large department and maybe 1 or 2 supervisors that help them out with day-to-day tasks. So the hierarchy goes employee, and then we have supervisors who are directly over those employees. Managers manage the supervisors, and then client users, which are users who have rights beyond employee self-service roles and options. So employers have the option to let employees, supervisors, or managers view, edit, or hide information in employee self-service. If you choose to let them edit, workflow can be attached to any type of information that they're allowed to edit. So some of the options that you might choose to allow them to view or edit would be name and address information, employee documents, their pay history. You would probably want them to be able to view that. They won't be able to edit that, and as well as W-2 history. Training, if you decide to set up training for your employees, employee contacts, direct deposit information, tax information, and then there's other things like company assets. If you choose to set up tracking of company assets like computers or even cars that employees are assigned, awards, prior employment, skills, certifications, performance reviews, and things like that in the HR department. So this screen right here This is where we would go to assign the employee, the supervisor, or the manager access to view or edit information in their employee self-service portal. So in this company, this is my demo company, I have given full pay history access to, we can see this is the employee right here, employee access. Managers and supervisors and also terminated employees have full access to their pay history, as well as their W-2 history. But if we want them to be able to, let's say we want them to be able to only see what direct deposit information that they have in the system. Here, direct deposit read only, if we clicked on this option, I clicked edit on the blue action bar there. And if we decided we only wanted them the ability to employees to be able to see their direct deposit information, we could click on this box, and the same for their managers and supervisors. We could click on those boxes and make it so that they can only view that information and not edit it. The way I have this set up, though, is if we come down here, direct deposit updates. Updates is the key word here. Employees, managers, and supervisors are able to make those changes in employee self-service. And as you can see, I've also allowed them to update their name and address information. Also terminated employees, sorry, I have to keep scrolling up so you guys can see employee, manager, supervisor, terminated. So terminated employees, regular employees, managers, and supervisors all have access to update name and address information in employee self-service, as well as tax information updates, direct deposit information, personal information, such as employee name, address, or any kind of personal information that they want to say about themselves. And then also down here, I have clicked, sometimes I have a hard time finding them, so I just do Control F. Control F. Training. Updates. So I'm just going to click Save. We didn't make any edits to this page. But in our example today, I have an employer who has set up a serve-safe food handling training for an employee, and they want their supervisor to be notified when the training is completed. So what steps do we need to take in order to set this up? So the very first step that we would have to take is to make it so that employees and supervisors have access to training updates in the employee self-service portal. So now that we have edited that and made that available to them, we have to assign a supervisor, assign the role of supervisor to an employee, assign a supervisor to that employee, and then set up the workflow so that email notifications will go to that supervisor when that employee enters a training in their employee self-service portal. So let's go ahead and take a look at the job screen. Because in order to do this, we need to assign a supervisor, or we need to assign an employee the supervisor role. So the very first thing that we need to do is go to Client Management, Job, and Jobs. The job screen is where we can assign a job to an employee, but it also lets us create job titles that can be assigned to employees. So we have these job titles: President, Vice President, we have Secretary set up. As you notice, they all have job codes. Those codes can be whatever you want. Delivery driver, I have a whole bunch of jobs. This job screen at the client level, this allows us to create all the different positions that an employee could be doing within a company. So you can designate also whether they supervise or manage others by using a manage others or supervises others checkbox on the position or when you create the position. So let's create a new job title. And I believe 500 is taken. So let's make this code 600. And we can call the job title whatever we want. So we're just going to say supervisor. Let's say HR supervisor. Oh, let's say supervisor of payroll. And our job group is going to be supervisor. Actually, we're going to leave this blank because we don't have to use job groups, but you can set them up if you need to organize your supervisors and managers. This is the same thing with salary grade and EEO categories. You can set up salary grades for supervisors and then apply it from the dropdown. An EEO category can be applied for reporting purposes, but it's optional. It's not required. I have this job title as supervisor of payroll, but this job title does not define that this person or whoever takes on this role will supervise others until I select supervises others. Down here is an interesting feature of iSolved that I really love. This is the default supervisor search. Let's hit save on the supervisor role. Let's go to subcontractor. If you wanted to use this default supervisor search, you could enter an employee here. And any employee who was given the job title as subcontractor would automatically get assigned whatever employee is listed here in default supervisor. So again, if you wanted to use the default supervisors, any employee with the job position subcontractor would be assigned whatever employee is designated in this supervisor or default supervisor search box. So that's a pretty neat way of assigning supervisors to job titles without having to go to an employee by employee and assigning each employee their own supervisor. But right now, for the purposes of this example, we are going to go into an employee, and we're going to give them this role of supervisor of payroll. So I like to go employee management, employee summary. We could go to our employee list by hitting the 3 lines, and now I have all of my employees to select from. So let's go into Cameron. And we have this nice employee summary I'm sure you're all familiar with. And if you're not, we'll scroll down and we have here job title. Well, we just created a job title and we'd like to assign it to this employee. So let's click on the hyperlink job title and we'll select edit from the blue action bar. It does give us the option to have an effective date. A change reason, let's say this employee got promoted and we would like to put a change reason, such as promoted. You can create change reasons, and then once you create the change reason, they'll populate in this dropdown. Job, I can pick from any of the job titles that you saw set up under that client management job screen. So I'm going to pick 600 supervisor of payroll because that's the job title that I just created and said supervises others. If we were to assign this supervisor a manager, we could assign here in this manager search box, excuse me, and then we can click save to apply the changes. So now that we've assigned Cameron as a supervisor of payroll, it shows up as Cameron's job here under the job screen, but also if we go back to the employee summary, it's going to show up here under their job title. Now Cameron is a supervisor but has no employees. So let's go back into our list and let's assign Cameron an employee. So let's pick Jaden. And Jaden has her own job title. So we want to click on job title here. And even though we're not going to edit Jaden's job, we are going to edit. Let's clear this out. We're going to edit Jaden's supervisor. So we would go to the supervisor search. And I think you have to type last names. There we go. Cameron Bailey's the only supervisor that we have set up. So Cameron's the only supervisor that's going to populate in that dropdown. So we'll select Cameron, save. Now Cameron is set up as Jaden's supervisor. So now that we have Jaden with a supervisor, if we want, in our example, we want Jaden to be able to add a training for a ServSafe food handling certification in her employee self-service portal. And we want her manager, Cameron, to be notified when the training is completed. So we are at the step where we're going to take a look at how to do that using workflow. So although workflow sounds intimidating, it really isn't. It's workflow in iSolved allows an employee, a manager, or a supervisor to request changes or updates to a certain employee information through employee self-service in iSolved. The request can then be approved or rejected by the supervisor, manager, or client user with the proper client group access. So let's go into workflow. And workflow has two important things that have to be set up in order for it to work. We need to set up the actual workflow route, which we'll see in a minute, but walks through a series of steps, and then it sends automated emails based on what step it's at, and then a workflow transaction, which is an action of the system that gets tied to whatever workflow route we have set up. All right. And we are under Client Management, Workflow Setup, Workflow Routes. And we can see we already have a few workflow routes set up. We have union employees onboarding, we have salary group, we have some that are set up. So we're simply going to be creating a new workflow here. And we're going to call this, we are going to say this is a one-step workflow. So we're going to just say this is a training updates workflow. And our description can be whatever. I usually just like to copy and paste the name, but you can define it further. And then it asks you to select a pending approval user type. Well, we know that we want our supervisor to get the notifications. So let's click Save. As soon as we define the name and description and we hit Save, the second tab opens up for us where we're going to look at the steps and the actions that are tied to each step for the workflow. All right. So the very first step is a user-initiated workflow process. And the system automatically creates these steps for us. There's not much that we have to do. So we have one user type that initiates the workflow process. So here we can see that we can name this whatever we want. The system names it updates. So this is our very first step, and it's saying that the employee is going to initiate this workflow. Well, the system also automatically creates an approval process workflow every time we set one up. And in this example, we don't want an approval process, we just want to send a notification to the supervisor. So we are going to edit. And down here to that very next step, when the employee updates their employee self-service. Then we want to complete the transaction and approve. So we don't want an approval process for the supervisor just to get an email. We just want to say, okay, the employee has added a training. Let's notify them. Once we hit save, we can attach the appropriate email that will get sent to that supervisor. In my webinar last week, we did go over how to create email templates. So I've already created email templates for us to attach to our workflow. I'm going to attach this and we'll take a look at those email templates. So when I click attach, it's asking for a user type. This is which user type is going to receive the email. We want the assigned supervisor to receive the email. And what is the email going to say? Well, I can choose from my email templates dropdown. I can choose any email that I have created. So I'm going to choose the template called employee name. So this is the handle for the employee name has made a change. And I'm going to save. Now we have a simple workflow that says that when the employee updates employee self-service, that their transaction is automatically completed, and it's going to send the supervisor, the supervisor who's assigned to them, an email. Let's take a look at that email template because I want everyone to be clear on what email is going to get sent to them. So the email template that we want is the email that is going to the supervisor automatically when the employee has made a change. So I called it employee name has made a change, and I created it right here in Client Management Workflow Setup Email Templates. I filled out a subject line, who it's from, the email type, so it's going to be used in our workflow, so I selected workflow. And then the text that is going to be in the body of the email that's sent to the supervisor says, employee name has made a change to their training certifications in employee self-service. Please log in to review the change. So that is what they are going to see when we link that workflow route that we just set up to a workflow transaction and an employee submits a change online. So in order to actually make this workflow route that we have set up be recognized by the system. So right now we have a workflow route, but we actually don't have this action, this very first action, or iSolved system calls them transactions, linked to this route. So we have to go to workflow transactions, and so for every single workflow that we set up, it gets linked to a transaction. We have to say that this system action is what's going to trigger this workflow route. So we're going to call this training updates, and we'll just call it notifications. And we can describe what we are doing. We don't have to just copy and paste. We can say triggers, let's see, employee updates training in ESS, and triggers the workflow route training updates. Now the system is asking us to pick a transaction type. So all of these transactions that are listed are actions in iSolved that can trigger a workflow route. So we want to choose the applicable workflow transaction that's going to work with our route. So as we can see right here, it's called training updates. And that is just saying when an initiator makes a training update, that the system is going to link it to the workflow route. And which workflow route? Well, we get to choose right here. So we're going to pick the one we just created, training updates workflow. And we're going to make our priority number 1. Now this is very important, so we have to talk about it just a little bit. In the case that we have multiple workflows that are set to trigger on a training update transaction type, we will want to prioritize those actions in the system. So I have created actually a few. Take a look. Training updates. Oh, I created a few workflow routes with training, but I have only one with a transaction tied to it. If I were to create another transaction type that I want to trigger another workflow with the same action, like systemic action, I would have to, let's say we do this one. I would have to make this priority number 2. Why? Because we do not want the system to get confused by having both training updates try to trigger a workflow at the same time. So that is the importance of prioritizing your workflow routes if they have the same transaction type. If you have multiple workflow routes that you're trying to tie a workflow transaction to that have different transaction types, you do not need to prioritize them. You can just leave them as one. So in that case, we would have one training updates route, and we might have one employee job updates, and both of those can be priority 1, and that is fine. Finally, let's take a look at how we can alter the scenario to set an approval process in place for the same situation where we have an employee who submits a change to their training certifications through employee self-service, and we want an assigned supervisor to be able to approve or reject that training request. So in order to do this, we are going to build another workflow route with an approval process set in place this time, and then we're going to tie it to another workflow transaction. So here we are at Client Management, Workflow Setup, Workflow Routes, and we're going to add a new workflow route, and we're going to call this Training Update Approval Process. Pending approval user type, we're going to choose assigned supervisor because the supervisor is the user type who is going to be approving the request from the employee. So once I click save, again, it opens up that steps and actions tab, and it already has our defined steps and actions, which the system, remember, automatically sets up an approval process for us. And because it does that, when we walk through each step, we can kind of see how the workflow is going to go. We just have to actually attach our actions to it, which our actions in this case are our emails. So this says initiate. This is a user-initiated workflow process. This is step number 1. And we'll edit this to say the employee submits a training update. And it is the next step. It's going to go to the pending approval step. So let's save this. The next step is the pending approval step, where the assigned supervisor can choose to approve or the assigned supervisor can choose to reject the change. Then it tells us the next step in the workflow is to, if they approve it, complete transaction approved. And if they reject it, the next step would be complete. The transaction is rejected. In the description over on the left here, it will show you the transaction approved and transaction requested there are no more next steps because this is the end of the workflow. And as you can see, the workflow process has been completed. And for the rejection, the data has been deleted. For the approval, the data has been committed to the system. So we have a workflow set up by the system, but we don't have it doing anything. So let's just attach the proper emails to this. So when the employee makes a training update, what email do we want to send to the supervisor to say it's pending approval? Well, I would assume it would be something to the assigned supervisor, so that's the user type is who it's going to, and it should be something like employee has requested a change, which is, again, these are my email templates, so I selected employee has requested a change from my drop-down box. Now, we also have the opportunity here to add more than one email or action. So I'm also going to send an email to the employee that says, your change has been submitted. Once we save on the blue action bar, those two emails are going to automatically go, one to the supervisor and one to the employee when that employee makes a training update. To send an action on the next step, which is the pending approval step, we can attach emails over here in the same manner as we did on the first step. So if we approve, if the assigned supervisor approves, then we want to send an email to the employee that says, your change has been approved. And click Save. On the same step, if the assigned supervisor rejects the change, we want to send an email to the employee that says, your change has been denied. You can also choose in this approve step to send an additional email, maybe to your general manager that details the specifics of the change. Like I said, you can set up more than one email, even to the supervisor, saying that your change has been, that you've approved the change and your employee has been notified. Oh, let's return to steps. So that is how the workflow route should be set up for this approval process. The last thing we have to do is go in and actually tie it to a workflow transaction. So we know how to do that because we just did that. And we're just going to call this one Training Updates Approval Process. And our transaction type is Training Updates. Our workflow route that we're going to tie to it is this Training Updates Approval Process. Because we already have a workflow built around the training updates, action, we would prioritize this as number 2. However, it would be highly unusual for you to set up 2 workflow transactions, 2 training updates, one to just send notifications and one to have an approval process. It would really be one or the other. So in this case, I would save this. We're actually going to inactivate this. And we're going to go to our approval process and prioritize it as our number 1 workflow route action that we're going to take when we have a training update. In order to really illustrate this approval process, let's walk through what it looks like for the employee to submit the training update employee self-service and then the supervisor to approve it. So I'm going to pull over my employee self-service portal that I have set up. I'm logged in as employee Jaden Anderson, who we just set her supervisor to be Cameron Bailey. And down here at the bottom, we have this employee self-service tab. Actually, I'm going to close that so you guys can see that one more time. Employee self-service down here. And here are all the things that she can view or edit if we've given her permission. Down here is training updates. So Jaden is going to add that she took well, in my example, it's a ServSafe course, but right now we'll do a CPR course. And she's going to just say she took it at Spectrum. And these are all optional fields. You could put an instructor, mark it if it's complete. She could put a cost if we're going to maybe reimburse her for the cost. And she can specify whether it was mandatory or optional, the class name, credits earned, and the expiration date of this training certificate. She can also specify the start date, end date, and duration. And then here is the reimbursement section. So if you're having your supervisor approve this training, they would also take into account any type of reimbursement and say, yes, that's okay. And she's going to put an approval date, and maybe the supervisor says yes or no. All right, and then she can put comments. So let's save this. All right, and so this is going in her training updates record section, and it should be out there now for the supervisor to approve. So let's log out of her and log into our supervisor's iSolved Employee Self-Service Portal. Now we're in Cameron Bailey, who we set up to be our supervisor, her Employee Self-Service Portal. And in order to switch from her employee view to her supervisor view, we just click on the little person icon and toggle down and switch to supervisor view. And we're going to go to the pending transaction dashboard. So pending transaction dashboard here. And we can see that we have updates are pending approval. We have Jaden Anderson, who has put in a training transaction type. So we'll just click on there. And it says CPR, external Spectrum Health, $150 for the reimbursement. You can toggle between approve and reject here. Your supervisor can. Let's approve Jaden's request and process. That's simply what your supervisor would have to do, and an email will be sent to Jaden now approving or saying to Jaden that that has been approved. All right. At this time, I do have a few questions that were emailed to me after our webinar yesterday, and I would like to go through and just answer each one, and then we'll wrap this up. So the first question was, can an employee upload their own documents if I choose to let them edit the document section of Employee Self-Service? And the answer is yes, they can upload their own documents and save them to their file. They will be available in the Employee Documents section of iSolved for any user types that have permission to see them. So if we go back to our self-service roles, whoa, and Control F, and we'll find documents full access here. If we open that up to employees, managers, and supervisors, they will be able to upload their own documents. The managers and supervisors will also have access to those documents. All right, next question. Can an email go to my supervisors notifying them an employee has requested a change, and a separate email go to my general manager notifying them when the change is approved? And the answer is yes. And I do think I briefly walked through this, but I wanted to answer this again. You can send additional emails in your workflow by adding another user type and email to the step approved or rejected. So you would just attach an additional email to the workflow step approved or rejected. So if we went back to workflow, and when I say the step approved or rejected, what I mean is this pending approval step here, the action approve or reject, we could set up one email that goes to the employee, and we could set up one that goes to the assigned manager that says, it would say whatever the email template said. So it could be like this, this change has been approved by a manager would be a better example. You could set this action up to have as many emails as you want. So that is very helpful. And then finally, our last question. I would like the supervisor for one location to get requests from employees of that location, and another supervisor who supervises employees in location B to get only requests from the employees of location B. Is this possible? Yes, and how that is accomplished, it's actually just it's a system setup. Employees who are assigned to a supervisor, their request will only go to their assigned supervisor. It's not going to go to any other supervisors that are not assigned to them. If we have a situation where we have one supervisor and under that supervisor different pay groups, and you want, let's say we have hourly and salary, and you want the hourly pay group within that location to go to a supervisor, and then you want the salary to go to a manager, we would set up different workflows to accomplish this. So we would set up two workflow routes, one to capture the hourly employees, and then when we went to tie that to a workflow transaction, we would set up an eligibility rule for that transaction that would define location A or pay group, pay group salary or pay group hourly. So that is accomplished, and if you do have other questions on that, feel free to email me, but yes, our system can accomplish that. Thanks so much for watching today. I hope that if you do have questions, you will email over. And I hope that you learned a lot about the functionality of iSolved. All right, have a great day.